Hey there, and welcome to DIY Projects with Pete. In today's episode, we'll walk through the process of how this ice resurfacer was built, also known. Now, in the last video, I documented the process of how I built a backyard ice rink, and along with that comes some maintenance. And so this is what I use to help keep the ice in good condition. Now, I was gifted this tractor from a couple of buddies, and it needed a lot of work. It was an old tractor built in 1979, and so I restored it and decked it out in my favorite team, the Minnesota Wild's colors and some decals. Now, there's a great community of backyard ice rink builders, and if you're one of them, I'd love to hear from you about what's worked and what you've built as your own ice rink resurfacer. And also, if you're just somebody who enjoys skating and you've had the opportunity to skate on an outdoor rink, please let me know about your experiences in the comments below. All right, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and let's get started with today's build. So this whole project came about because my buddies Dustin and Dayton were planning to gift me with a backyard for my birthday, and at the same time I was actually going to get started building one myself, and they found out I was going to get started soon, so they ended up delivering the gift much earlier than anticipated, and hence it still needed some work. So I basically had a blank canvas to create something really cool with the tractor I was given. They found this 1979 11 horsepower Bolin tractor for $100, and it definitely needed some work. The first project on the agenda was to figure out a solution to counterweight the tractor. Once filled with water, you can see it wanted to blast into space like a rocket. So Dayton stopped by on a Saturday morning to help with continuing to build this backyard ice resurfacer. We started by making some brackets to bolt onto the front of the tractor that would hold up the rack for the counterweights, and we used 1 3/4 inch angle iron and some 3-inch wide, 3/16 inch thick flat bar to build the rack. I did 45-degree cuts and then welded the rack together. The front frame of the tractor had some good solid steel to bolt this rack onto. Next, I added some flat bar to the rear rack the guys had already made. I had an idea to eventually frame in the tank, so this would provide a little larger platform to do so. I had some 80-pound bags of concrete laying around that I used to test out the counterweight rack. It held the 240 pounds with ease. My buddy Dustin had sent me a link to a water tank he found on Craigslist. It looked like it'd work perfect, so I called the guy and went to pick it up. The plan was to get this machine out on the rink by the end of the day to test it out and see if it would actually hold up with all the weight on it. And after strapping the tank down and filling it with water, I took it out for a spin down to the mailbox and back, and it held up just fine. In order to drive on the rink, I needed to modify the board system a bit. To do this, I removed 2 of the 4-foot sections of nice rink boards and then ripped a sheet of plywood to the same height as the boards. I gave it some white paint to help the wood blend in and then screwed the kick plate onto the plywood. The setup looked pretty rough, to be honest, but this would be a good test to see if the tractor was going to work. I zip-tied a towel onto the piping and tried things out for the first time, and it actually ended up getting the job done pretty darn well and gave me a lot of hope that this setup was going to work great once I got everything dialed in. The new gate for the snowblower and tractor to drive in has been working real well, and you can hardly tell it's even there once the board slides back into place and the bumper is added. Now it was time to start restoring the tractor and to make it look cool. The front tires were struggling to hold air, so I ordered a new set on Amazon and put them on. They were a little beefier than the old tires, and they're made to bear more weight. I wanted to remove all the old and cracked decals so the tractor would eventually get a new paint job. A razor blade and some heat from a hairdryer made the job go by quick. I climbed up to the storage loft out in the shed and found some old sheeting that I could use to form a box to hide the counterweights. I took it into the shop and started cutting it to size. I like to use the Diablo Steel Demon blade when making straight cuts since it works so well and makes great cuts. I made 3 sheets to about 17 inches in width by 20.5 inches in height, and this would provide room for concrete blocks to be put in the rack. I spot welded the panels together from the inside and then welded some beads after things were tacked in place, and then cleaned things up with a flap disc on a grinder. The tractor was prepared for painting by sanding the old paint with an orbital sander and angle grinder, removing the lights, and then cleaning grease and dirt near the engine area and on the footrests. A towel was put over the engine to prevent overspray, and then I used a hunter green colored paint to start giving the tractor some new life. I did a couple thin coats, and it really started to transform the tractor and make it look nice. I put the front tires back on and then added 6-inch chrome tractor wheel covers to jazz things up a bit. Spray painting the tractor continued, and then a high heat paint was added on the muffler and some of the engine parts. Once the paint dried for the counterweight box, it got bolted onto the frame, and the original rear tires were kept, but just needed a little cleaning before the 8-inch wheel covers were put on. The old seat was pretty torn up, so I unbolted it and put a new one on that was similar in size to the one being replaced. The lights Dustin and Dayton had added were put back on, and then I started putting on a few Minnesota Wild decals. The tractor had trouble climbing up the hill from my house to get to the rink, and it spun around a bit too much without studs or chains, so I put on snow chains for the rear tires. I ordered a rotating beacon light that had a DC plug, so I drilled a hole with a step bit for a DC power socket and then wired it up. The next step was to build a frame around the bottom of the water tank to prevent it from sliding. I used 1 3/4 inch angle iron for this and used a plasma cutter to notch out around the area where the water comes out of the tank. The corners were each cut at 45-degree angles on a chop saw, and then the edges were cleaned up with a flat disc. Finally, I welded it together and test fitted on the rear rack. I picked up some aluminum diamond plating to use around the bottom of the counterweight box and then around the rear rack to spruce things up just a bit and to give it a chrome look. Each panel was then attached to the steel by drilling holes through each and then attaching with a few nuts and bolts. In order to collect some of the leftover snow before the water hits it, I built a blade to go under the center of the tractor. I cut down a piece of 1/4 inch thick by 4-inch wide flat bar into one section, and then 2 shorter pieces that were wings to keep the snow in the blade area. And the existing lever and mechanism that raised and lowered the old mower deck is actually being used to raise and lower this blade. I just needed to use some flat bar to make this function work. I used bolts to connect each of the pieces so I can easily remove and adjust any parts if needed, and the blade was first attached to the lever mechanism, and then another flat bar was attached from the blade to the rear part of the frame to keep the blade sturdy. Once this was finished up with, I welded the angle iron frame to the rear rack, cut the diamond plating panels, and then test fit them around the frame. I decided to bolt on a thinner removable 1/8 inch thick flat bar that could be sharpened easier and then adjusted up and down if needed. Next, I removed the diamond plating so I could paint the rear rack and the blade and then any other areas that needed to be touched up. And the used water tank had been sitting outside for quite a while, so I decided to clean it up. Once the paint had dried, I assembled the blade to the tractor for the last time. I was able to use a 1/2 inch diameter bolt, some nuts, washers, and stop collars to help secure it to the lever mechanism. The remaining portion was made of 1 inch and 1 1/4 inch wide flat bar that I had laying around the shop. The panels were reinstalled around the tank frame, and then I added some blocking at each corner to keep each panel together nice and tight. The tank went on, and then I tried out an LED light under the tank. It worked even better than I'd expected. To counter the weight of the water, I used concrete blocks from the hardware store. They each weighed in at about 33 pounds, and after a little testing, I found that 10 were going to be needed. This came to 333 pounds for the concrete, and then the water weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon, so full tank on the back of the tractor is about 542 pounds. Next, I started working on the mat that will drag behind the ice resurfacer to help the water go on evenly. I found a 56-inch wide towel and cut it in half. And then next I used a grommet kit to put a grommet in about every foot or so. And the grommets were super easy to do. You basically cut a hole through the towel, insert the base piece through the towel, and then put the top part on and secure them with a few hits of a hammer. Here's a look at the 1-inch Schedule 40 PVC piping being dry fit together to test the layout. I knew I'd need to make some adjustments, but I wanted to get a general idea of what it was going to look like. I drilled a couple 1/2-inch diameter holes in the steel rack that will be used so the tank can be secured down with a strap on each side. I then cut the excess strap and burned the ends so they don't fray. I put a puck light on so I could see the shifter and dash area at night. The next step was to start gluing the pipe together once I had the layout that worked best. I used a few of the union pieces that you can screw so that I can easily remove the tank or work on the piping if needed at a later time. And the piping goes together super quick and it's really easy to cut. I modeled the pipe layout design after an ice resurfacer design I saw on YouTube. The guy had a really good idea, so I did the PVC pipe layout pretty similar, and you can check out his tractor Zamboni project video by clicking the link in the description. I assembled the ice resurfacer out of 1-inch PVC, some 90-degree elbows, 45-degree elbows, T-sockets, and then some threaded end caps. I'd highly recommend picking up a ratcheting PVC cutting tool to make this part go super fast. To glue everything up, you'll first use the pipe cleaner, followed by the purple primer, and then you'll glue at each joint. I measured about every 1.5 inches for the hole placement that the water will flow out from, and used a 5/32 inch drill bit, and you can always make the hole larger later if you feel it needs to be a little bit bigger. Work your way from one end to the other until all the holes are drilled. The ice resurfacer was then attached to the rear platform using some 1-inch pipe clamps, and I pre-drilled and then used an eye hook on each end to help hold the pipe about 1 inch or so up from the ice. Center the towel and then pre-drill and insert a sealing hook at each grommet location. I used a vice grip to help turn in each of the hooks, made it a little bit easier. I then connected the 1 1/4 inch flexible spa pipe to the ice resurfacer and got ready to fill up the tank and try it out. I hooked up a hose to a spigot coming off the main water line, and I'm eventually going to run a hot water line so I can use hot water to fill the tank. Now, unless you need to clean your garage, I'd recommend shutting the valve from the tank before filling the tank, as I had water all over the place before I knew it. And it took about 6 minutes to fill the tank, and then it was time to try it out. I was super excited to try out the Zamboni for the first time, but it ended up being a complete failure for round one as the weight of everything turned the tractor into what looked more like a bucking bronco, and the frame just wasn't strong enough. So we had to drain the tank and then figure out how to bend the tractor back. Turns out a skid steer does an excellent job fixing bent tractors, and we pushed the center down with a couple 2x6 boards, and we're back in business. The next morning, I ran out to the steel yard and picked up some 3/8 inch and 1/2 inch thick flat bar, as well as some angle iron to beef up the frame of this little tractor. I got back to the shop and started customizing the pieces so I could weld and then bolt them into place. I ran various pieces of steel all the way from the front of the tractor to the rear and had to do quite a few cutouts to make everything fit right. I filled up the tank and took it out for another test now that the frame was all beefed up. It drove up onto the rink with ease and it felt a lot more solid. We got a little snow overnight, so I cleared it off quick before resurfacing the ice. Here's a look at the first trip around the rink. It was working well, but the water wasn't coming out as fast as I wanted, and I discovered the tank needed a vent hole drilled in the cap because a vacuum was being created and the water didn't want to drain very fast. And so once I drilled the hole, it solved the problem. One other modification was to cut down the ends of the piping so it was closer in width to that of the towel, and then it also made it easier to get closer to the boards. We've used the ice resurfacer a handful of times already and continue to get it all dialed in. It used to be a bit of a chore to resurface the ice, but now with this tractor Zamboni, I actually look forward to getting the ice redone and ready for the next skating session or game. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed checking out the process of how this ice rink resurfacer was built. If you're a backyard rink builder and have built something similar or have something that you've built that's worked really well, I'd love to hear about it. Please share below. And if you're just a hockey enthusiast or you've skated on an outdoor rink, tell me about your experiences or what level you're playing at right now and just what's going on with your hockey career. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video, and cheers from Montana.